guys, I'm Amy. Welcome to part 2 of my painting hacks, tips, and tricks for furniture flippers. Before we get into more details about painting furniture to flip, I just want to ask you real quick to subscribe to my channel if you like videos about furniture flipping, furniture painting, or mural painting. And hit that like button if you learned anything in this video that's helpful to you. I also want to let you know that down in the description you can grab a free furniture flip pricing worksheet that I have there to help you work out how much to pay for things, to offer to pay for things, and then how much to price them for so that you can make the profit you want to make when you're flipping furniture. In part 1, I talked about scuff sanding as a way to prep your surface. Today I'm going to talk about a couple other ways that you can prep other than sanding. One of them, and this is what I did on a piece that I've been working on right now, is using a product called liquid sandpaper or no sand or liquid deglosser. It comes under quite a few different names. But here, let me see the one I got most recently. I think that the term liquid sandpaper, if you go into any hardware store, they'll know what you're talking about. It comes under different product names, but this is what it is. It is a liquid that you wipe onto the surface, and it helps soften up the coat of paint on top, and it helps clean off any extra gunk and make the surface of the painted piece more ready to receive another coat of paint or something else on top. So it's a pretty quick way to prep the surface and get it ready to receive paint if you feel like you don't need to really do a lot of sanding or priming. This is a pretty easy step, and it also cleans it up. Now, another product for prepping is primer, and when you're painting furniture, the primer that I would always recommend is this one, which is 123 Bullseye Primer, and the reason that I recommend this for furniture is that it has shellac in it, and shellac is the one specific product that will block stains from seeping through, bleeding through the paint that you're putting on top. And so this is a subject that has bothered so many people who are painting furniture to resell, and you usually don't really know that much about it until the first time it happens to you. You do all this work to paint a piece, and then some stuff starts bleeding through after you finish, and you have to go back in and do more work. It's super frustrating. So I think I'm going to do an entire video going into detail about primers and about bleed through and when to use them, what kind to use, and what types of things bleed through and how to prevent that. But on the project that I was working on this week, I just used the liquid deglosser or the liquid sandpaper because I was painting it in a dark color and I wasn't too worried about bleed through, and I felt like it would receive the paint pretty well once I just put a coat of this on top and softened up the top coat of clear coat. And if you'll see what I'm doing, I'm rubbing it in with, I think I used an old sock, a piece of cotton or a cloth, you can rub it in, and it's a little hard to get it down into the cracks of a piece like this that has a whole lot of carving, but it's actually easier to get down in it with this stuff than it is if you're sanding with a piece of sandpaper. So when you have something with a lot of crevices and different cracks and grooves, then I think that the liquid sandpaper can be a good choice to make sure that you're kind of cleaning out in there and also getting it ready to receive the paint. The next thing I got a lot of questions about is what kinds of paintbrushes to use. And so when I was painting this one, I painted it gray with some chalk paint, and I'm going to show you what my favorite brushes are, which are the chalk painting brushes. They're a little pricier, and I will show you a lower priced alternative too, but let me grab some of those brushes. Okay, for chalk painting brushes, my very favorite are the Primo, this is Annie Sloan chalk paint brand. They're real bristle brushes. They're super thick and they're rounded on top, so they don't give you like hard lines in the paint when you are painting. You don't get like a sharp edge from the paintbrush. And what you need if you're painting with a fairly thick paint like chalk paint is you need a brush that's going to stand up to that. We like to have soft paint brushes so that they put the paint on real smooth, but what sometimes you don't realize is if the brush is super soft, it's not strong enough to stand up to this thick paint body. So you need a brush that has some heft and is strong enough, stiff enough to push that heavy paint around if you're using a heavy paint. And if the paint's a little heavier, you probably won't have to do quite as many coats. So getting a thick enough brush is helpful. If you want to use a version that you can find at the hardware store that's less expensive, there's some brushes called zebra brushes that have kind of a similar shape and work in a similar way, getting kind of down into the furniture and around corners and things. These are helpful. I like to use them for a lot of different stuff. And then I'll talk about wax in a minute as a way to seal. This is what's considered a waxing brush for chalk paint, and it looks a lot like a stencil brush, but it's one that's like a nice smooth one. It's not like a real rough nylon one. It's actually made with real bristle hair. But don't worry, because you do not have to have some big expensive or hard to find paintbrushes to be able to do this. There are plenty of paintbrushes you can just get at the regular hardware store, or that you may already even have in your garage that will work for this kind of thing. Like I said, I think it needs to have enough body that it doesn't just bend super easily. You want it to be soft enough, but not just bending in half, because you've got pretty heavy paint that you're trying to push around. One like this, some people like the shorter handle, find that more comfortable, and some people like the angle. And then I use one of these for smaller things that I'm doing, or corners or anything like that. These are good because the chalk painting brushes that are rounded, they can't get down into little bitty corners like this one can. And finally, on the other end of the spectrum when it comes to price is these chip brushes that are readily available at the hardware store real cheap. I get these at Home Depot all the time. They look like this when they're unopened, and this is a 3-inch one. My favorite size is the 2-inch, and they also come in 1-inch. So I use this 2-inch for just a ton. This is a workhorse brush I use for all kinds of stuff because they cost $1 or $2. And so if they get ruined, I don't worry too much about it. And when I like them the best is when they're old like this and worn down. This is when they're really good. And so when they're new, their bristles are too long and soft, and they bend too easily, and a whole bunch of the bristles fall out. So they're annoying when you first start using a new one, but you have to do that to kind of break them in, and you can just pick the pieces of bristle out. I usually will do that on a primer coat or a first coat or something that doesn't have to be perfect. I'll use one of these. And then the more you use them, they will turn into something like this, which, as bad as it looks, these are super handy. I use these all the time because they're shorter. They have more resistance. They've gotten rid of all their extra furry junk that's falling out, and now they're just about right to paint all kinds of things. And so when they're like this, I will use these until they're basically used up and almost worn down and I can't use them anymore. But these are super handy, and they're super cheap. And if for some reason I forget to rinse it out, or if I need to use something that is not water-based and I don't want to have to get out paint thinner or turpentine to clean it out, I don't mind using one of these and then throwing away if it's one that's pretty much gone already. I got another question also about, as far as products and how to deal with the wood, about stripping paint and paint strippers. And I will tell you that I hate using paint stripper. There's almost no way to avoid it being just a pretty nasty chemical bunch of gunk. I mean, they're not healthy, nice smelling things to use. But if you do decide that you want to strip something, just a few hints I would give you is that use more of the product than you think. Put it on pretty thick. Use a paste or a cream one that's not super runny, and leave it on thick on there for quite a while to let it do its work, and it will break down the paint on its own. Then you still have to go in and kind of scrape it all off to get it off. So think about what it is you want to strip before you do it, because large flat surfaces are really relatively easy to do. But once you get into curves and surfaces that are standing up straight and things that have carvings, it's much harder to get all that paint out of there and all the little crevices. So I typically avoid, if I'm going to strip anything, it's usually just a top smooth surface. My kitchen table, I did strip the top of it, and then I left the bottom, the legs painted and the chairs painted, and I like it that way. And then I clear coated on top and sealed it, and I left it kind of looking like it had some old paint and stuff. I like the way that looks, but I typically don't spend a lot of time stripping stuff otherwise if it's not just a large flat surface. Now, another way to get paint off, if you want to get the paint off, is by sanding, just sanding it. And if you're having trouble getting the paint to come off well enough when you're sanding, you're probably not using a high enough grit of sandpaper. So start with a higher grit, and remember, the lower the number, the rougher the sandpaper it is, so the higher grit. And the higher the number, then the more soft the sandpaper is. So you want to start probably with a high grit that's like an 80 or something that'll really take it off, and then you move up to a higher number, which is a softer sandpaper, until you smooth it out more. All right, and then today I also want to talk about another way to seal or finish out your piece of furniture. Last time in the part 1 video, I showed you like a clear coat or a polyurethane for high traffic areas. This time I'm going to show you using wax. And that is typically a lot of times what's done for that chalk painted look. And also they make colored waxes that are pretty. I'm going to show you what I did in this project. I did a dark gray table with white wax on top because it looks really pretty when you have something with a ton of carving like this table. I knew that that would look really pretty where you could see every bit of detail in the carving. So I put white wax on it to go down into all those cracks, and then I wiped it back so that you see the kind of light gray of the table and it has a really pretty look. So wax can be good to achieve these effects if you want it to look more antiqued. There are dark waxes, so if I was painting that table in a white, I might have used a dark wax to get it to go down into the cracks, or like a gray wax, so that again you have the contrast between the pieces, the parts on top and the parts down in the cracks, so that it really accentuates all that carving and all those beautiful shapes. When you do wax, you use, like I said, you can use a brush that's kind of like a flat stencil brush. Although in my case, because I'm doing white wax, I decided to use a zebra brush that's less expensive that I saved just for my white wax, because I don't want the colored waxes getting into my brush that I use for my clear wax. And so when I'm doing the white wax, I use the less expensive round zebra brush, and it works fine for that too. You put the wax on, you wipe it back after a few minutes, you wipe off the excess, and then you can leave it for a little while, and you can buff it with something like, a clean cotton cloth. The harder you rub on it, the more it will have a shine to it, because it's wax. It's kind of like you're polishing it. And then that will cure over time and harden and give it a nice coating that will protect it. So like I said, there are several options for what kind of paint you use, for what kind of prep you do to the surface, and for what kind of sealant you do at the end. And that kind of depends on the look you're going for or the products that you have on hand. And a lot of people seem to have questions about that first thing you do before you paint and that last thing you do after you paint to seal. And so if you have more questions about those kinds of things, I would love to hear them in the comments. And like I said, I think I'm going to try to do specifically a video about bleed through and priming and how you prep surfaces to have a minimum number of problems when you're painting something and finishing it out to flip. All right, like I said, give this video a like if you found anything in it helpful or useful, and I would love to hear down below anything you've learned from experience or any questions you have, and we'll all keep working together to learn more and keep flipping. Thanks for watching.